This is a post-Christian podcast.
Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Revolution Meet Your Congregation. As always, this is a podcast where you do exactly what it's called. You meet the congregation of Revolution. But today we kind of have someone who's not only been a congregation member, but has spoke at Revolution, but has also been a amazing friend to me and helped me through some of my darkest moments, and is a fellow minister and has been a pastor to me, and I've been grateful for him and his life. I can't really say enough good things about our next guest, so we'll just get into it and see what happens. But we want to welcome Lawrence Richardson, Reverend, Pastor. I don't know what you prefer. I don't go by anything anymore, but welcome, Lawrence.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a joy and an honor to be here, and I just love you so much, and thank you so much for your work and your ministry and your presence in the world. So thank you for having me.
See, already encouraging us. Well, Lawrence, I know what you do, and I know who you are, but folks who are listening may not be familiar with you. So I'll ask you this. I have three questions, I guess. We already know who you are, but we'll ask that again. Who are you? What do you do? And what are you passionate about?
All right. Well, I am a pastor. I am a digital evangelist. I'll explain what that means in a moment.
Yes.
I am a lover of wisdom and knowledge, and I am a trans person also. And I am an African-American person who resides in the Twin Cities. So that's a little bit about who I am. I am the pastor of Linden Hills United Church of Christ in Minneapolis. I have been there for 5 years, and now I've just been voted as their lead minister. I was on staff with my predecessor, and he is retiring. And so right now I'm passionate about moving into the year 2020 with a new congregation, with some new vision and mission and purpose statements. I'm also passionate about digital ministry. And so I call myself a digital evangelist because I love using social media and digital media to really amplify the Christian voice, and not necessarily a particular brand of Christianity, but just the way of following Jesus and what that means, specifically thinking about the Beatitudes and grounding myself in what it means to really think about God as love and to live that out in my life. So I'm really passionate about connecting with people. And so this platform is really great. So thank you for having me on this platform, because, again, this is another tool that we can use to let that light and that love shine.
Cool. It's cool to have you on as a guest, Lawrence. It's cool that this worked out, because for the listener, you and I actually met in person just incidentally through the catalyst of the UCC. At their most recent annual conference, I was there to interview the president, John Dorhauer, and you and I just kind of happened to run into each other in the hall. You were talking to John, and then I came up to ask him a question or something, and he was like, "Oh, hey, Caleb, you got to meet Lawrence," and you, of course, know our mutual friend Brian Otland, and so yeah, it's kind of cool the similar circles that we run in, and that we were able to set this up. And I didn't even know that you knew Jay, much less had spoken at Revolution before. So that was really, because that was before my time at Revolution. So it's wild how those things can line up sometimes.
I really believe all great people are connected. It's not 6 degrees of separation. It's more like 1.
Cool. So how did you land at the UCC? How did that, or I guess maybe for starters, what's your faith background? What was that like leading up to where you are now?
So I grew up Southern Baptist, very, very conservative Southern Missionary Baptist Church in the Twin Cities. My family filled with evangelists and ministers and missionaries. And I was all set to kind of follow in that path until I realized that the God that I believed in, and the God that I gave my life to was a very different kind of God than the one I was being taught about at that church. And so the God that I was really being taught about was a very angry, judgmental, restrictive kind of God. And so I set out on a path of exploration that led me to Catholic college for undergraduate school, majoring in English and sociology, but then also minoring in philosophy, and then going into seminary at a Baptist college or a Baptist seminary and studying world religion and realizing that all of us, no matter what stripe of Christianity we put God in such a small box. And so I don't identify as an evangelical Christian anymore, but I also don't identify as a progressive Christian. I kind of am a little bit of both because I can never really give up who I am and where I come from and what I've learned. But I also understand a shift in my theological understandings that lend itself to more progressive leanings. And so, I was ordained in a tradition in the fellowship church that was more progressive than my Southern Baptist roots. And I was serving a church, and it was a predominantly Black, predominantly queer church. I was the associate pastor. At that time, I felt, though, that God was calling me to something different. And I didn't know what that was until about 12 years ago. I saw a TV commercial, and it's called the Ejector ad, and it's a UCC commercial. At that time, I didn't know anything about the UCC or the Congregational Church or anything like that. But this commercial showed a sanctuary filled with all different kinds of people. Very obviously gay couple, a Middle Eastern person, a single mother, and they just one by one started being ejected out of the church. And at the end of the commercial, it said, God doesn't reject people and neither do we. And I was like, oh my God, that's the church. Like, I don't know anything about that church, but that's the church.
Oh, cool.
So long story short, a really wonderful serendipitous moment came when a job opened up at a local church, and I took that job. I was hired, and a month after starting that job, we had our annual conference, and we went to this meeting, and I got lost, and the only thing that helped me find my way was a bunch of signs with the red comma that was in that same commercial. And that's when it kind of clicked that, oh my gosh, I'm at the church. And so, at that point, I was just kind of making deals with God, like, this is it. This is where I feel called. This is where I want to give my life and where I want to minister, because I don't believe that the body of Christ should be fragmented. And I don't believe that we should be divided based on our race, class, gender, etc. And so the UCC for me was that godsend. And it's the place where I feel certainly called to serve, but I'm just grateful to be a part of this denomination.
Cool.
And the UCC is kind of a wild denomination because it's like, it's very structured and organized, but it's very open and affirming to people. I mean, just to all people. And I just spoke at the St. Paul's.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
And it was really kind of beautiful to see. Well, one, I can kind of get a vibe for a crowd when I speak to them, but I wasn't sure what this was going to be. And then I got into the crowd, and I just like, these folks are thinking, and their hearts are open, and nothing I'm going to say here is going to cause anybody to get up and run out of the room. Or, I'm not going to get Brian fired, because honestly, I've had a few people fired because they booked me. Not in a long time, but I have. And so it was really great. And I don't know why I didn't put the two and two together, you guys all being in the same denomination. But yeah, I think for me, you've been such an encouragement to me, and I don't know if you realize this, and I hate to shift gears all the time, but I'm going to shift gears again. Last time we had lunch together, or maybe the time before that, it was either the last time or the time before that, we had lunch, and I was thinking about leaving the ministry again, and I wasn't sure what to do, and and you were like, you need, stay in the ministry, either come work with me or get a job somewhere or do that. You know what I mean? We were talking about that. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's so nice to have people in your life when you're questioning God, you don't know if you believe, you don't know where you're at, you feel like your life's falling apart, and they're saying, look at other avenues in ministry. Now, I had another friend of mine, a humanist friend of mine, telling me, you got to quit. You got to give up. You got to stop. And this was somebody I really, really respected, still respect. But they were like telling me to move on and do that. And then we had our conversation, and it was just the complete, it was a complete flip side. And it really impacted me in such an amazing way. And I wanted to just make sure I thanked you for that.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that blesses me. So thank you. And I'm glad this was useful.
Well, you've been more than useful. You've been an extraordinary friend. And your story is extraordinary. Just the type of church you're in, you've transitioned, you're transgender, you're a black man. I mean, you have a very diverse church. You bring the diversity to the church, which is amazing. You just represent it. And, for me is you've bleeded so much of my faith tradition of Jesus into me that when we talk, I don't see someone who, I don't see, oh, we have a transgender African-American pastor sitting in front of me. You know what I mean? I see someone who's bleeding out Jesus. You know what I mean? And it's really great, because too, when I tell people about you, that's what I tell them. And then I go, oh, wait, like, what about, like, oh yeah. Do you know any transgender ministers? And that's not the first thing that comes to my mind. You're not the first person who comes to my mind, because I go, I know a lot. I know that this amazing person named Lawrence, and I just have always appreciated, your spirit. There's something, and it continues makes me want to preach more and go out more and encourage people more, because there's a human experience that I feel like when we first met, we just completely connected on a human experience. It wasn't, oh, I've been through this and you haven't been through that. It wasn't, you're a white heterosexual male and I'm here. We just connected through the fact that there's a lot of suffering in humanity. There's also a lot of healing, but there's a lot of suffering, and we connected through that. And to me, I'm just eternally grateful for that. I'm just eternally grateful for that, and for you having that compassion and that purpose. And I just wish more people like myself and things like that could have that. But I think what you have is contagious, and I'm so glad you're doing this job and that you're going online and doing it, because I think it's something that's desperately needed in the church. I don't know. I feel like I always have to put ifs, ands, and buts when I'm trying to explain my faith, and like, oh, and an asterisk, and I'd much rather just be like, oh, here's Lawrence. Just talk to Lawrence. So you're doing, a job well. I know we're supposed to be talking to you about Revolution, but that's my 2 cents, and I'll let Caleb come in with some Revolution questions.
Well, thank you for that. And I will say, just before Caleb, that in terms of just how I can be the way that I am, especially with you, Jay, you are someone that brings the best out of people, even if you aren't trying, because you are so vulnerable, you're so open, and you just are you. And there is no pretense, and you don't make people feel better or worse. You meet people where they're at, and you could be someone, and rightfully so, right? So jaded, egotistical, kind of removed from the world, and you are just the epitome of like servant leader. And so
thank you.
It's easy to be myself with you because you make it so safe. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, Jay has always only spoken very, very highly of you, Lawrence, and it's really, it's encouraging, and it's always moving, and kind of it can center you even in times of doubt and darkness, when you have someone who radiates the archetype of Christ, even if you're not sure what, even if your definition of Christ or your understanding of Christ, either historically or spiritually, is not exactly where it was, or maybe in a time of transition or whatever it might be. I know in my life, I don't know you very well at all, but I know in my life, people who provide what you have provided, Jay, and what you do provide, Jay, are always a centering force. It's like I don't know exactly, even if you might be in a place where you're saying I don't know exactly what Christ is or what God is, but here is a person who is embodying love. That's always a centering and encouraging thing that can kind of keep you going in times of uncertainty. So.
Amen. Thank you for that. The embodiment of love. I think I'm going to write on that now. Thanks for that, Taylor.
Yeah, it's almost, I kind of see it as the body of Christ, as the incarnation of Christ, the making flesh of Christ is when people radiate that to other people and provide that to other people and wash other people's feet, incarnate Christ on a daily basis,
Yes, it is a process, and it's one that's not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not.
So what's the makeup of your congregation? Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about your church?
Sure. So we are the first congregation in the neighborhood of Linden Hills. We were established in 1902 as a church for a resort community that traveled to Lake Harriet from all the way over in Minneapolis. This was horse and buggy days. So, downtown Minneapolis and Lake Harriet were like worlds apart. And people would travel to stay in their summer homes around the lake, and they wanted to have a church. Oh. So the church was established because they didn't want to go all the way back in the city. Well, they found that this church was vital to the community, and it continued well past the summer. And it just became an actual congregation, and it started planting other churches. And so Edina Morningside Church is the first church that it also kind of gave birth to in 1903. Right now, we have a makeup of about 300 adults and children that range from, I think our littlest one is 6 months old all the way to 94 years old.
Wow.
And we have predominantly white, about 80% white congregation, and the other 20% is kind of spread between Asian and African American and Hispanic and et cetera. And so we are in the midst of transition, as most churches are. And so right now we are thinking about what our mission is as it pertains to not only our community, but our building and how we use our resources. And so we're opening up our space to a lot of different community groups. Right now, we have a couple hundred people that use it in the evening for different support groups, but we're looking at what it would look like to use the building during the day for maybe office space or recording space or what have you. And so we're looking at ways to use our building as a ministry tool as well. And so I just love this church. I am the first African-American person, the first trans person, probably the first openly queer person. But, and the fourth person installed since Harry Truman was in office. And so,
wow.
This congregation loves long-term pastors.
So you got some job security, huh?
I love it. They love me. It's a great match. I don't want to be one of those millennials that has 4 different careers by the time I retire,
Right.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful church. Social justice is deeply rooted in who we are, but so is education and the formation for youth and families. And so I call it a family church, but you don't have to have, an extended family or kids or be married even, because once you come and be a part of the congregation, we become family. And so I love leading in that way, but I also realize that within all families are dynamics that we don't necessarily always want to bring to church with us. And so being able to really lean on the best of who we are, but then also set up really clear boundaries about who we are and how we are to follow Jesus. Because it's one thing to just kind of be a part of a group because we get along, but it's another thing to be in intentional community because we are agreeing that this person or this model is what we want to do or what we want to follow.
Cool. Maybe I should have started with this, but I don't think I know how you and Jay first came into contact and became friends. Can you give us a little history lesson there?
So I'll let Jay also talk. But,
Sure. I'm interviewing both of you now.
But I will say we met through a mutual friend about almost 10 years ago. And I, of course, have followed Jay as much as one can follow someone that they don't really know in the public, and just admired who he was and all that he had to kind of endure and go through as he kind of grew up in front of the world. And so I just kind of admired that because that's a very challenging reality, and one that I think he has navigated well, in spite of how he might interpret that or find it himself. And just kind of always respected him. So when we met through our mutual friend, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fantastic. And I tried not to be like, obsessive fanboy, but in the beginning it was hard not to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was just really, like I said before, but with Lawrence, is you're just blown away with his love and his grace and his acceptance and everything society tells us about me and Lawrence connecting the way we did with, the society says no.
Yeah.
There's too many differences, and you two couldn't connect. And it just, I was just like, well, there's another myth gone. You know what I mean? It was just like, we just connected, and to me, we met through a really great mutual friend, and it was just, I don't know. I mean, it was just like, I just felt like I'd known Lawrence forever, and I had felt, if I hear people talk about inclusion all the time, and you don't expect the white heterosexual male, I know I say that a lot, but you don't expect that guy to need inclusion, but we do. We're sensitive people who have pain and things like that. And it was like, I felt that inclusion right away. I felt safety. And so we just hit it off. I didn't even know Lawrence was a fan. I just knew Lawrence was an excellent person right away. And so that, to me, that drew me in, and I knew, I know when I'm on E, or if I'm at the end of my rope, it might be time to call Lawrence and grab lunch and just be like, oh, I have, just either just chat or just lay it out on the table, and we've done both. Yeah. And so to me, that was, really great.
It's like the old question, who does the doctor go to when the doctor goes? Who's the doctor's doctor?
Well, and Lawrence too, was on when I did This Is Radiocast. I had Lawrence on This Is Radiocast.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it wasn't just all just like, oh, just come speak at my church and do this. To me, This Is Radiocast was kind of my, and I'd like to do it again eventually, but it was my secular thing. But you know what I mean? So I was like, okay, if I'm going to have a theologian on or a speaker, preacher, pastor, it's got to be somebody who's got their pulse on the pulse, basically.
Cool.
And has their finger on the pulse. And Lawrence was one of those people,
That's
it's
really
like,
cool.
So it wasn't just like Henry Rollins and,
maybe
Dan Savage, but it was, Lawrence Richardson and people like that who just were doing things that I was like, these are people who are doing things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Well, Lawrence, maybe I've been aware of you longer than I realized, because I don't recall a specific episode, but when I was a mere Jay fanboy as well, I was binging all the podcast stuff. So maybe I've heard your voice before I even realized. Who knows? That's wild. Cool. So when you were in that fanboy stage of your relationship with Jay, were you like listening to all the Radiocast stuff, and did you start listening to Revolution Church at a certain point when it was or when it became a podcast?
So a little bit of all of those things. I as a Jay admirer, I wasn't aware of Revolution Minneapolis at first. I knew about other things that Jay had done, and so when I first learned that this was happening, and I was like all on board, sign me up. Obviously, because I work on Sundays, there's only been a couple of in-person gatherings that I've been able to make, but that was just kind of those, like, if I'm in the area, I'm in town, this other person is in the same state, why would I not go and see them? And then of course when the recordings became available and that became the thing, it was like, oh, I'm absolutely listening. And then when Jay joined Instagram, it's like, I'm absolutely following.
Yeah.
See Revolution Church Minnesota on Instagram. It's like, yes, this is great. And so for me, I just, I feel like the love and the respect that I have for Jay, extended to the people of Revolution before I met them. And then, of course, when I was able to come and speak in person or do recordings, every single person that I've ever met has been fantastic and just so inspiring. And so everyone that Jay attracts has been similar in spirit. So I've just really been able to follow because of that.
Cool. From the times that you've had interactions with Revolution, do you have any? And I please be fully honest about this because we're still trying to map out some things with how we operate. Are there any things that you've observed that you think that we could work on to do better, or to certain things that we do well that we could do more of, or things that we could adjust in how we operate? Can you give us any pointers as a pro?
No, first of all, no, because all of us could tweak, I'm sure, something. The one thing I will say, and I similar to Jesus talk best in parables or stories, but I was mentoring someone, and they had an interview for a job, and it was for a church, and they asked the person doing the interview called and asked for a reference, and they asked what the person's strengths were and what their weaknesses were. And the best way that I could describe it is this person, or in this case, Revolution, is vital, is a point of connection that brings not only people together, but life and intention and energy together. And when all that comes together, so much is possible. And then on the flip side, and what I was able to tell about this person is that when you have something that's so amazing and exciting and worth sharing, it's not a burden and it's not perceived as one. And so then when you invite someone to engage in that work, you're not asking them to share a load. You're not asking them to roll up their sleeves and get to work. You're asking for them to join in and collaborate on something that's extraordinary, that has the power to transform lives and inspire people to live their best lives. And so when I think about Revolution, I also wonder what it would be like to invite people into a revolution, and what it would be like to invite people not into a space to do this thing that's heavy or burdensome, but inviting them to the table to take part in something that's transforming the world.
Wow. That's very cool.
Yeah.
And overwhelming.
I mean, no small task. Jesus started with 2, and then 2,000 years later ended up with billions.
Yeah.
So.
Just have to be crucified. That's it.
Yeah, right.
But you know, we have been crucified in the flesh.
True.
Every single day that we stand up, or, you know, in your case, sit before an audience or a group of people. You know, that's why I say this is not for the faint of heart. I can certainly embody the light. Jay, look in your eyes, do it. I can embody the light. You can embody the light, but it takes so much to become a person who can sustain that light once it comes. And so the sustaining happens through the trials and the tribulations and the hardships and the lessons of life that grow us up, but also the things that knock us down. And so just thank you for being that light bearer.
Well, I'm glad to be able to do that. Sometimes I do it and I don't know it, you know, and you know, being a father of 2 little ones, you know, that just, in some ways it helps, because it takes some of that insanity of being in that position, you know, where you kind of hide the light down, or you just try to give it to your kids, you know what I mean? So you don't have to worry about it all as much. But it's also strange because it's like, keeping it in the right place and then bringing it back. And, it's a whole nother world I live in now. I thought life was tough, man. Having kids it's like it's the toughest job you'll ever love. It's like what's that group called? What's the toughest job you'll ever love? The Peace Corps.
Oh,
I remember that, the commercial. The toughest job you'll ever love. But that's what it is. So, what do you want? I guess you asked the question in a different way, so I didn't realize you asked it.
I'll ask you one more thing, Lawrence. In a little bit of a broader sense, maybe ask the kind of that same question. What do you think that the church, the Catholic, or the Church Universal, the capital C Church, what do you think the church is doing well and also can work on?
I think the church does many things well. I think the church builds community and nurtures a sense of belonging very well. One of the things I hope that the church with a capital C does differently or begins to see differently is what inclusion means.
Yeah.
And really start telling the truth about how the laws and rules and traditions that we have came to be.
Yeah.
I think if every single person in every single church pew or every chair knew where their sacred texts came from, and how they were organized and how their religious traditions were established, and how all of those things really started from colonialism.
Yeah.
I think that would shift the conversation a little bit. I think that Christianity has been co-opted by a lot of things, but I think that the lies that a lot of people believe are truth are the things that need to be dismantled before we can build the beloved community of God.
Amen.
Wow, that's a beautiful answer. Very well put.
Well, Lawrence, thank you so much for taking this time and spending it with us. And people can just find Lawrence Richardson. Is that your tag on Twitter and Instagram? Larry2_0 or ltrichardson.com. Great.
Awesome. Great plug.
So go check out Lawrence and everything he's doing because it's amazing. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Thank you both for your work. Peace and blessings to you.
Love to you. Bye-bye.
We'd like to remind you that our ministry is supported 100% by listeners like you. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.
Hi, I'm Caleb with Post Christian Podcasting. If you enjoyed this episode, you might also like The Sacred Collective.
We need more voices, I think, to kind of get up and say this is not okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Start with your article and we'll interrupt you.
All right. So my article is just basically my story, and I'll read it, and you guys stop me anytime and ask me questions.
Perfect.
All right. Most people didn't know that at one point in my life, I checked myself into conversion therapy. I recount my memories or the lack thereof. The dangers of gay conversion therapy, also called reparative therapy, has been brought to light in the wake of Gerard Connolly's memoir, Boy Erased, and now the twice-nominated Golden Globe movie. Besides the numerous articles outlining this dangerous practice, the film acted as a catapult for personal stories from ex-gay therapy survivors like myself. I remember sitting in a theater watching the film with my husband and friends, unable to move. My husband must have sensed my tension because he tried to gently hold my hand, but they remained motionless, clenched at my sides throughout its entirety. I couldn't move. I never spoke about my experience with how I checked myself into gay conversion therapy. Most of my friends don't even know that part of my life. It was a weekend night when I came home from work, and I walked into the house where I noticed both my parents in the kitchen. I've done it almost every day, but this time around, things seemed different. The air was tense, and I could feel something impending. Walking into the kitchen, I saw my mom fervently washing the dishes quietly with her back towards me, and my dad sitting next to the table with one leg over the other, quietly looking down. My eyes traveled to the rectangular object on the table, and my heart stopped. There, laying on the kitchen table, is a gay porn Falcon video I stashed in my room, adorned with butch leathermen on every surface of the VHS tape sleeve. My heart stopped and dropped, and my surroundings began spinning in slow motion. I was caught, and there was no getting out of it. I was closeted and still living with my conservative Romanian Pentecostal parents, because in my culture, you don't move out until you're married. Needless to say, all my friends at the time got married in their early 20s, and I was still a good Christian boy waiting for the right girl. Quotes. My parents took me to the garage and ordered me to smash the VHS tape to pieces with a hammer while they prayed to cast out any gay demons in the name of Jesus. My mom didn't speak of the event again, and my dad told me to, quote, just stop being gay.
Shit.
If it were possible, I would have, but I couldn't and I didn't. I was living a double life where at church, I was a good Christian boy, while on my free time, I'd sneak away with men I'd meet online or at the bar. I was miserable, depressed, and torn. There had to be a way out of it, I thought. That's when I stopped by the local Christian bookstore. I peered through the shelves in the men's section, looking cool and casual on the outside, while my stomach was in knots on the inside. Topics of how to be a godly man, sexual purity, fatherhood, warriors, sports, etc. took precedence. Then there it was. Tucked away was the book on how to break free from the, quote, bondage of homosexuality.
That was a post-Christian podcast.